My family smiled during my father's funeral, but that laughter faded when the lawyer began to read the will. The envelope lacked a return address. It simply bore my name, written in a stiff, familiar script. I almost discarded it with the other junk mail, but something stopped me. My fingers shook as I opened it, preparing for an unknown feeling. Inside was a funeral invitation. My father was gone. I stared at the paper, trying to conjure up some emotion. Shock, sorrow, anger. But I felt nothing. Just emptiness. It had been a decade since I had any contact with the Moore family, 10 long years since I left Charleston, where every disapproving look and harsh word had made it clear I was no longer part of their world. I still recalled the day I left. Caleb was just a baby in the backseat of my car, while I drove away with a split lip and a suitcase full of baby clothes. I had finally escaped from the man who had hurt me in more ways than one, and instead of comfort, my father had given me shame. "You made your bed," he had said, and that was the end of it. But I didn't crumble. I created a new life for us in Savannah, quiet, modest, but secure. I found a job shelving books at the library, read bedtime stories to Caleb, learned to breathe again. Even though my father never reached out, never apologized, never inquired about my well-being, I still sent him money each month through Mr. Gerald next door, ensuring he had what he needed. I never disclosed this to anyone, especially not to Caleb. Now, holding this letter, all I could think was, why now? Why invite the daughter you cast aside? Caleb must have sensed my turmoil because he approached me and quietly asked, "Are you going to go?" I didn't respond. My throat was too tight. I simply stared at the crisp white paper. Then he added, "Maybe he left more than a will, Mom. Maybe there's something for you." I looked at my son, my anchor, my witness, and something shifted within me. I didn't know what awaited me, but I recognized that if there were any words left unspoken, I needed to hear them. So, I folded the letter, packed my bags, and prepared to return to a place I had vowed never to see again. The chapel appeared smaller than I remembered, with wooden beams above and stained glass dimmed by a grey Charleston sky. It should have felt sacred, but the air was thick, tainted by old perfume and even older grudges. As I stepped through the double doors with Caleb's small hand firmly in mine, heads turned before we'd even made it halfway down the aisle. Whispers flared like sparks. Some didn't bother to conceal their astonishment, while others stared at me as if I were a spectre. Then I saw them. Lindsay and Mark stood near the front, dressed in impeccably tailored black attire, their expressions of grief carefully calculated, just enough to be noticed but not enough to smear. Lindsay's gaze locked onto mine, first showing disbelief, then her lips curved into a slow, sharp smile. Well, she murmured under her breath, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Looks like the prodigal daughter thinks there's money left." Mark let out a quiet laugh, but his eyes held no humor, only judgment. The same judgment I had grown up with. I didn't reply. I just kept walking, eyes fixed ahead, spine straight, even though every part of me wanted to turn and flee. I found a seat at the far end of the last pew, as far from them as possible. I hadn't come for them. I hadn't come for drama. I had come to say goodbye. Caleb slid in next to me, gripping my hand tighter, his fingers trembling. I leaned down slightly and whispered, "It's okay, baby. We're just here to sit." But deep down, I knew it wasn't okay. From the front, the preacher cleared his throat, and the service commenced. Prayers and a few shaky eulogies, the kind of polite mourning that felt rehearsed and hollow. My name was never mentioned. No one acknowledged I was his daughter. They jumped from childhood memories straight to Lindsay's dutiful care, Mark's business trips back home to assist with things. The narrative was neat, tidy, edited. My father had died as he lived, weaving a story that excluded me. Caleb leaned his head against my shoulder, quiet and still. I stared ahead, but my ears burned with every sideways glance and muffled laugh behind a tissue. I wasn't crying, not because I didn't want to, but because I had already shed all my tears long ago. When the service concluded, people began to file out. A few walked past me without a glance. One older cousin offered a stiff nod before looking away. Lindsay rushed by as if I were invisible, with Mark trailing behind, stopping just long enough to meet my gaze. "Didn't think you had the courage to show up," he whispered. I held his gaze without flinching. "Neither did I," he smirked. "Don't get comfortable. It's not your story anymore." He turned and walked away, leaving me frozen in that pew. Caleb's head still resting against me, my hand wrapped around his as if it were the only real thing in the room. They didn't realize I wasn't there to be part of their story. I was, there to conclude it. The Moore family home hadn't changed. Same white columns, same red brick, same ivy climbing the porch as if choking something beneath. But stepping through the front door after a decade felt like entering a freezer. Cold, sterile, silent in all the wrong ways. Guests had already begun to gather. Cousins, old neighbors, a few business partners I recognized. Most faces were familiar, although none looked directly at me. Their conversations hushed as I entered the room, but I felt every sideways glance like a pinprick to my skin. Lindsay stood near the fireplace, swirling white wine in a crystal glass, as if it were a celebration rather than a funeral, while Mark leaned casually beside her, one hand in his blazer pocket, the other holding a matching glass of red. They appeared more like hosts at a cocktail party than children mourning their father. When they saw me enter with Caleb, Mark's mouth twisted into a grin. "Well, this won't take long," he announced, loud enough for half the room to hear. "She got cut out years ago." A few people chuckled uncomfortably, while others turned away as if remembering something urgent. I remained silent. There was nothing to say. I kept my coat on despite the crackling fire, and Caleb stayed close, his small fingers gripping mine tightly. He didn't utter a word, but I could feel his eyes scanning the room, observing every movement, sensing the tension in a way only a child who has endured silence and storms could. We settled into seats near the back of the parlor, far from the hearth and the wine. I took in the framed photos that still adorned the walls. Lindsay in college, Mark on a boat, family vacations to Hilton Head. Not a single picture of me, not even from our childhood. I wasn't surprised. I had been erased with precision. Lindsay caught my eye and smiled. Not a kind smile, but a possessive one, as if I had intruded upon her domain. "You can sit if you want, Rachel," she said sweetly, "but don't expect a chapter." I gave her nothing. Caleb looked up at me, and I saw something in his eyes. Not fear, not confusion, but focus, as if he were waiting for something significant to unfold. Somehow, I knew he was right. The room fell into an awkward hush as the front door creaked open again. Thomas Dawson entered like a man who understood the chaos he was stepping into. Same crisp grey suit, same leather briefcase, but this time carrying something else. A small cedar box, polished smooth and held tightly under one arm. Lindsay barely glanced up from her wine while Mark checked his watch, as though he had somewhere more important to be. "Thank you all for being here," Mr. Dawson said, his voice low yet commanding. "Per Mr. Moore's instructions, we will begin with a video message before addressing the formal reading." The atmosphere shifted, thickening. "A video," Lindsay scoffed, already exasperated. "Can't we just get to the will? We all know what it says." Mark nodded. "Yeah, let's not drag this out. Some of us have flights." But Mr. Dawson remained unperturbed. He calmly walked past them and placed the cedar box on the coffee table in front of the fireplace, then opened his briefcase. "It was your father's express wish," he stated, "that this be viewed before any legal matters are addressed." Lindsay rolled her eyes, while Mark muttered something under his breath. A few cousins leaned forward, curiosity piqued despite themselves. I remained quiet, but Caleb sat up straighter beside me, his grip on my hand loosening slightly. I glanced down at him, and his face, soft and open, radiated a quiet yet unmistakable hope. He didn't speak, but I could feel it emanating from him, as if he already knew something significant was about to happen, and for the first time since entering that house, I didn't feel alone. The screen flickered, then stabilized, a faint hum filling the air. And then there he was. My father, older than I remembered, thinner too. His once proud shoulders had softened, and his cold, sharp eyes were now shadowed beneath an unnameable weight. He sat at his old oak desk, the one that had been off limits to everyone but him, the painting of the marsh still hanging behind him, just as it had throughout my childhood. He looked directly into the camera. "If Rachel is watching this," he began, his voice low and gravelly, "I owe you the apology I never gave." Every breath in the room seemed to freeze. "I was wrong," he continued. "I judged you for leaving a marriage I didn't understand. I thought you were weak, selfish. I allowed myself to believe what I wanted because it was easier than facing questions I wasn't ready to hear." He paused, fingers twitching in his lap, a nervous tick I had never seen before. "When you showed up on my porch that night, bruised and trembling with your baby in your arms, I should have opened the door. I should have pulled you inside and said, 'You're safe now.' But I didn't. I let pride speak louder than love. A lump formed in my throat as Caleb reached for my hand again, his little fingers entwining with mine. I kept my gaze fixed on the screen, reminding myself I was doing the right thing, teaching you responsibility. But the truth is, I was punishing you for leaving, for choosing yourself, for daring to be stronger than I ever taught you to be. I heard the subtle shifting of chairs behind me, someone exhaling too loudly, but I couldn't turn away. I couldn't. Not now. I found out the truth, Rachel. A few years ago, Gerald came by with an envelope, claiming it was from a friend who wanted to cover the heating bill. The handwriting, it didn't take long to figure it out. He leaned forward slightly, eyes glinting. "You sent money every month for years, quietly, no credit, no contact, just care. Even when I gave you nothing in return, even when I acted as if you didn't exist, you never stopped being my daughter, even when I ceased being your father." My breath caught, and I blinked hard, trying to suppress the tears that were already spilling, hot and silent. "I watched you from a distance," he continued. "Gerald told me how you were doing, about the library, about Caleb. He said he was bright, that he viewed the world as you do, with patience." He smiled then, a small, weary smile that broke me. "I don't deserve your forgiveness, Rachel, but if I can leave you with anything, let it be this. I was wrong. You were right. You did what I should have done long ago. You protected your child. You walked away from pain and built something better." He took a shaky breath. "I don't want to be remembered as the man who turned his back on his daughter, so I've changed the will. They don't know yet, but they will." Gasps fluttered around the room like startled birds. Someone cursed under their breath. Lindsay shifted sharply in her seat, and Mark's jaw tightened. I barely heard them. "All I ever wanted was to be proud of my children," my father said. "And I am, of you, of the woman you became when I wasn't looking." The screen dimmed for a moment before illuminating again with his final words. "Tell Caleb thank you for giving me one last chance to be a father, even if it was from a distance." Then everything went dark. Silence descended, thicker than grief. No one dared to speak. But for the first time in 10 years, I heard my father loud and clear. The screen had barely gone dark when murmurs began. Confusion, anger, denial. Mr. Dawson didn't wait for silence. He adjusted his glasses, opened the leather folder on his lap, and stated, the video was to provide context. Now, per Mr. Moore's revised, notarized, and legally binding last will and testament, I will read the final allocations." Lindsay let out a sharp breath through her nose, like she was ready for battle. Mark folded his arms across his chest and leaned back, smug again, as if the video meant nothing. "My daughter, Rachel Elaine Moore," Dawson began, his voice steady and formal. "I leave the Charleston family residence, its contents, and surrounding land in full." I felt every eye in the room turn toward me, disbelief flashing across their faces. My hands were frozen in my lap, Caleb still nestled against me. "In addition," Dawson continued, "I leave to Rachel Moore the sum of $250,000 in liquid assets and all remaining balances in my retirement savings." The air shifted. He wasn't finished. "And to her son, Caleb Moore, I leave a college education, trust in the amount of $100,000. My heart skipped as Caleb blinked up at me, mouth slightly agape, trying to comprehend what those words meant. I was still trying to understand too. Dawson paused, then flipped to the final page. "To my son Mark, and to my daughter Lindsay, I leave the following: a collection of family photo albums, my old military compass, and the Bible given to me by my mother when I turned 18. A gasp escaped from somewhere in the room. Lindsay shot to her feet. "What?" Her voice was sharp, high, already trembling. "That's not possible. There must be a mistake." "There is no mistake," Dawson replied, unfazed. "Your father amended the will 2 years ago. The documents are certified, witnessed, and registered with the county." Mark stood as well, jaw clenched tight. He was sick. He didn't know what he was doing. "He knew exactly what he was doing," Dawson responded, closing the folder with a soft snap. There was a moment of stunned silence before he spoke again, this time softly, reading from a handwritten note attached to the will. He asked me to read this aloud. "Let them remember who showed up when it mattered. Let them remember who stayed quiet but never stopped loving. This house should belong to the one person who never asked for anything and gave anyway." Lindsay stormed from the room, with Mark following after a pause, dragging disbelief like a shadow behind him. I didn't move. I couldn't. Not because I was in shock, but because for the first time in 10 years I didn't feel erased. I felt chosen. "You must have tricked him," Lindsay snapped, her voice cracking as she turned toward me, wineglass still in hand but forgotten. "There's no way he would have changed the will on his own. You must have." She halted, the accusation choking in her throat. I stood still, needing no words. The video had conveyed everything. "You manipulated him," she said again, louder this time, her face flushed with rage. "After everything you did to this family, you waltz back in here and act like some silent saint. This is pathetic." Caleb flinched beside me, and I rested a hand on his shoulder. He didn't need protection. I just needed to remind myself that I was still grounded, still present. Mark stepped forward now, voice low but seething. "We'll challenge it. There's no way this holds." He wasn't well. He was confused. And wow, absolutely wow, Mr. Dawson didn't blink. "Your father's will was amended 2 years before his health declined. He was of sound mind. It's witnessed, notarized, and on file with the court. There is no legal ground for dispute." Mark opened his mouth to argue again, but stopped when he saw Dawson's calm stare, the kind that comes with decades in courtrooms and zero tolerance for entitled theatrics. Around us, the room had gone still. Some cousins were whispering, while others slipped out through the side door, coats clutched awkwardly, faces averted. No one wanted to meet my gaze, not out of hatred this time, but possibly guilt, maybe shame. Lindsay's breathing became uneven. She looked torn between crying or screaming. Her hands trembled as she set the wineglass down too forcefully on the sideboard. "This is a joke," she muttered. "It's a damn joke." She turned and walked out without another word, with Mark following a few seconds later, his jaw clenched, tightly as if it might crack. Just like that, the room emptied. They thought they had buried me 10 years ago, but I was still here, and now they were the ones fleeing. The room was quiet now, not awkwardly quiet, not tense, but settled. I remained where I was for a long moment, Caleb beside me, his small hand resting in mine. His grip had loosened, but he hadn't let go, and neither had I. No one else remained in the room. The murmur of retreating voices had faded down the hall. Doors clicked shut, and footsteps disappeared. Slowly, I rose and walked toward the corner of the room where the old leather reading chair sat tucked beneath the bay window. It was still there, unchanged, worn at the arms, creaking at the joints, molded into the shape of the man who once called it his throne. I gazed at it for a moment, then reached down to gently brush my fingertips along the top edge. "Goodbye, Dad," I whispered. "I forgive you." The words didn't catch in my throat, they didn't burn or twist. They simply landed as if they had been waiting to be spoken. Behind me, Caleb didn't speak. He didn't need to. The fireplace crackled softly, casting a warm orange glow over the room, illuminating the photographs on the mantel, the worn floorboards, even the air. Everything felt different now, not hostile, not heavy, just calm. I turned to look around the house one last time. For the first time in years, it didn't feel like a place that had banished me. It felt like a home that had finally exhaled. Maybe some ghosts don't leave. Perhaps they just wait for the right words. And I had finally expressed mine. Weeks later, the house was quiet in a different way. The kind of stillness that follows a storm, not destruction, but peace. Caleb had claimed the sunroom for his art supplies. Every morning, I found him there sketching cardinals, blue jays, wrens, every bird he could spot in the backyard trees. His laughter sometimes echoed through the hallway, soft and bright, filling spaces that used to ache. One morning, a letter arrived in a plain white envelope, no return address, but I recognized the handwriting, Gerald Adams. I opened it carefully, my hands steady. "Rachel," the note read, "the day he realized it was you, I'd never seen your father look so small. He carried that truth with him until the end." I folded the letter and stepped out onto the porch. Caleb sat on the top step, sketchpad on his knees, tongue between his teeth as he shaded in a hawk's wings. I looked out over the lawn, the oak trees swaying gently in the breeze. "He saw me in the end," I said aloud, not to anyone in particular. The girl they erased hadn't disappeared. She'd just been waiting for the truth to find its way home.